Um, Hi, I'm Jane. Um, thank you, Scott. Scott asked me to talk about the sixth step for the trauma-based addictions. I'm going to put it out that way so that it can sort of be generalized to all the trauma-based addictions. The spiritual principles do not change, but the content and the experience of the application of those principles does change depending on a substance based addiction or a trauma based addiction. And, oftentimes people who have a substance based addiction, they already they also have a trauma based addiction. And what I mean by that is there's trauma based addiction. Um, somebody could be an absolute, utterly normal person. They grew up in a loving, consistent, untraumatic home, but the they have the gene. They have the atypical response to something, to chemicals, to alcohol, to drugs, to food. Their response to a particular substance is addictive, obsessive, compulsive craving. And then, they work the 12 steps and they put down the substance. And this person who had was appropriately responded to it every single developmental phase of their life, that person reemerges. But in a trauma based addiction, the addiction in and of itself is created by a person having to survive a traumatic upbringing. It creates the addiction. Like you can even see people write down their, bottom lines. You can make a direct correlation between the kind of things that show up on their bottom lines and how they organize their pain, their fear, their hurt, their sorrow, their despair, their confusion around a particular behavior that became not just a learned behavior, not just a sort of um, personality organization, but it crossed the line into an addiction. So the tricky thing about trauma-based addictions, it has a psychological cause, and it's going to have psychological symptoms. It's going to have distortions of emotion, cognition, and behavior. But once it crosses the line into an addiction, then it becomes a spiritual sickness. And only the power of God through the action of the 12 steps can give you any relief from that. And those basic principles are, and I'm going to repeat these because I think sometimes we think and our defects of character, right? They're going to be a distortion of perception, uh, maybe an amplification of emotion, or a distortion or a rigidity or of a useless behavior. So sometimes it misleads people because the cause is psychological and the list of symptoms is psychological. People think they can change it through psychological means. But once it crosses the line into an addiction, we are unable to change based on self knowledge alone. And I say this because it's like you can't behavior modification your way out of it. You can't cognitive therapy your way out of it. You can't psychoanalyze your way out of it. Now we inventory all those things. Those are parts of us now. We use them. But any attempt to change either a spiritual sickness, also known as addiction, or a defect of character related to one's own spiritual sickness or caused by somebody else's. And usually there is some kind of spiritual sickness, right? In the family of origin. It cannot be unraveled by any human power alone. It has to be done by God, and we do that the same six principles that started it all. Now we have 12 steps, but I like to talk about those six basic principles. Because the mind can hold on to, I'm going to pick five. The mind can hold on to five things at once. It cannot hold on to 12. And those and sometimes we lose sight of those five actions. These actions, when taken, will always invite the power of God. The first one is moral inventory. And that just means I am honest about my resentment, my fear, my self will, and my dishonesty. I'm honest about how I hurt people. That's it. That's really all that means. That's step four. And then the second one is admission. All that means is I tell somebody, I read that, whatever I wrote on that inventory about my resentment, my fear, my self will, my dishonesty. I read that to somebody. Whatever I wrote down about how I thought I might have hurt people, I read that to somebody. Inventory, admission, and then amends. Those things, uh, those things invite the power of God. There's nothing bad or evil about that. It's just uninventoried, unadmitted aspects of self block us off from the power we need to have God come in and change us. You know what else blocks us off from the power of God? Hurting people. It's when, and we don't have to feel bad about it. We don't have to feel guilty about it. We don't even have to change it. We do have to write it down and read it to somebody and ask God to help us make up for hurting people and try not to hurt people anymore. And that, and then we help other people write inventories. We listen to other people's inventories. We help other people make amends. Everything I'm going to talk about tonight, and then we make some kind of prayer, involve God. God help me with this. God help me with that. God, I can't do this. They don't have to be very complicated. Um, Everything I'm going to talk about tonight can only occur within the context of the power invited by those principles. Those were the principles that started off every 12 step program on the planet. When it looks like it's different for a different addiction, it's only the content that is going to change. It's only the experience that's going to change. The action, those are all actions, right? Write down an inventory, read the inventory, make up for things you've done, help other people do that. A spiritual principle is an action that is 100% doable that would invite a power to come in and do what I cannot do. And what I see in trauma-based addictions is people they want to leave out that action and try to change some aspect of their spiritual sickness, their addiction, obsession, compulsion, and craving by active will alone. And they want to do the same thing on their defects of character. And you know what happens? They fail because it can't be done. There's the steps are 100% doable. And sometimes I see people, I go, tell me how you do the steps. They're doing stuff that can't be done and that won't work anyway. And then they get discouraged and then they think the 12 steps won't work. I'm going to tell you this. Those actions I described, if you apply them to whatever is in front of you, trying to get and stay sober, trying to make it through the day, trying to invite to come in and God change a power or a pain of your past, something that's causing you grief in the present. If you take those actions on whatever that is, you will invite power to come in and change them. And I have this resist. I don't like things. I don't like setting people up to fail. I don't like people who've just been in the grip of powerlessness over their past and their addictions their whole life. I have very strong feelings about not offering them a solution that will just be one more thing that didn't work, just one more thing they tried. Failed. So I'm going to talk about step 6 because once we put down the addiction, right, then we come up against these defects of character. And I'm going to talk about what defects of character really are. They're not about you being a bad person. They're not about you being a selfish person. They're not even about you being unkind or lazy or not trying really hard or being stupid or it's none of that. Defects of character that are a part of a spiritual sickness, you are as powerless over them, active will alone, or over your own addiction. To make people feel bad about a defective character that they didn't create, they can't control, and they certainly can't cure, well, that's just mean and useless, and then people give up. Instead of offering something that they can do and that will really work, which is what we're going to talk about, Um, that's not letting people off the hook. That's not. That's just the truth, right? I see people relapse over and over again because of a defective character they thought they could change. Instead of someone say, "Hey, you want to write an inventory on that? Listen to it. You want to read that to me?" Oh, huh, well, I can see where that came from. It, see how you maybe hurt yourself or other people. Yeah, well, I'll help you make up for that. Now we have something that can really change. I'm gonna read. Gosh, that took longer than I thought, but um, Bill Wilson. A lot of people don't know this. Bill Wilson was a person who was in the. He got sober, obviously, but he was in the grip of defects of character based on an extremely traumatic upbringing. And he was abandoned by his alcoholic father. He was then abandoned by his mother, who I don't even think she had drugs and alcohol as an excuse. She just left him with his alcoholic grandfather to be an osteopath, I think. And he left him and his sister. And I think his grandfather did get sober, obviously without Alcoholics Anonymous, because it hadn't been invented yet. So he was a dry drunk. That was he grew up in poverty. He said he was born over a saloon. And so what happened was he's our co-founder that got sober and then had to come up against these trauma-based defects of character. So in the first, like in the big book, um, he thought, okay, wow, I did these steps, and God removed my compulsion to drink. And so our six in the big book, which is always at the starting place for me, step 6 and 7 were 3 paragraphs, you guys, 3 paragraphs. And step 6 was it takes about 15 minutes. In your fifth step, did you leave anything out? And then on the seventh step is the 7 step prayer, right? So step 6 and step 7 took 3 paragraphs. So if people feel confused about it, there's no very, very specific. He thought it was going to be one and done. He did. And we know this because then he wrote the 12 and 12 because he realized this was going to be a little more complicated than he thought. And so this is how he this is how he did the uh, this is why in the 12 and 12, step 6 and step 7, they get a chapter each because he realized this was. You might have to break this down a little bit. And here, I'm going to read you from the 12 and 12, page 64. Is having been granted a perfect release from alcoholism, why then shouldn't we be able to achieve by the same means a perfect release from every other difficulty or defect? This is the riddle of our existence. When men and women pour so much alcohol into themselves that they destroy their lives, they commit a most unnatural act, defying their instinctive desire for self preservation. They seem bent upon self destruction. They work against their own deepest instinct. As they are humbled by the terrific beating administered by alcohol, the grace of God can enter them and expel their obsession. Here, their powerful instinct to live can cooperate fully with their Creator's desire to give them a new life. But most of our other difficulties don't fall under such a category at all. Every normal person wants, for example, to eat, to reproduce, to be somebody in the society of his fellows. And he wishes to be reasonably safe and secure. And he tries to attain these things. Indeed, God made him that way. He did not design man to destroy himself by alcohol, but he did give man instincts to help him stay alive. So what we're going to see, and then he goes on to mention, the seven deadly sins, pride, greed, gluttony, lust, or whatever. And he's talking about, but see, those are just that's for a normal person. What a, I will talk about that in a little bit. But for someone who grew up in a traumatic environment, those defects of character were developed in a way they needed to be to survive in a dysfunctional and terrifying environment. Those all the defects of character of a person in a trauma-based addiction, they're going to be the survival mechanisms that they developed to get their needs met in an insane traumatic environment and to protect themselves from annihilation in also that traumatic environment. I'm going to repeat that. To get their needs met, often there wasn't a straight line to that. And then to survive the pain of what happened with that. So what happens is, they put down the addiction. This is all they know. It's not an exaggeration of a normal survival mechanism. It is something that they had to do. It's going to be a distortion of reality, which is one of the very best ways to survive an unfaceable environment. Some distortion of perception, something about our emotions and something about our behaviors allowed us to survive. And the reason that so that's why they can't be removed at once. No one is going to easily give up something that everything inside them says, I need this to save my life. The same, like he said, people put down alcohol to save their life. That's working with our survival mechanism. The problem is all the quote unquote, defects of character that causes problems now. They are helping us. They did help us survive, and we really can't see them any other way. So we are not going to become entirely ready. Have those be removed. Three things happen. One, we're going to write, we have to see, and we have to see how they protected us back then. So there's a three-part inventory that I usually suggest when people are facing step 6, or you can just do it on any defect of character that's in front of you. Write down all the ways that protected you. People talk about denial, like it's the enemy. There weren't denial. There weren't a way to block it out, or if there, and people talk about, like spacing out, not being able to stay in the moment. Oh my gosh, if people couldn't dissociate, if people stayed in many people, the present they were actually in, they would have died of fear and terror. There had to be a profound distortion of reality to survive. And then oftentimes they were asked to do things, asked to block out things, old things. There's one of my favorite books. If it doesn't talk about how to work the steps on them, so I'm not that, but it is probably the best book I've ever read in describing where these defects of character come from, how they help people survive. You'll get a really good list of them, And this is one of my favorite descriptions. Um, it says they have devised a system by which they have survived crushing disappointment, devastating abandonment, occasions of despair, ongoing separateness from others, overwhelming fear, and ordeals of being misunderstood and misread. Their system, defects of character, has been powerful enough to withstand the seductive whisperings from their own mind, which tell them that they might as well give up entirely. We develop these defect of character slash systems as it has saved us from annihilation. So what? Who's going to become entirely ready to give up something that you know has saved your life? The readiness of, like, say, to, like, maybe work a little bit on pride, or maybe work a little bit on not working so hard to make money, or it's going to be completely different because our whole concept of self, our whole worldview, our whole underlying architecture of what we're attracted to, what we need, how to get our needs met, is hopelessly distorted by a traumatic past. So that, what is it when I say hopelessly? What I mean is, what, anybody want to look at that and think, oh yeah, sure, I can untangle that. It's like everyone looks at that and goes, oh, I don't think so. And then what happens? They either ignore it, right, or they start to slide back into ways of dealing with the pain and the hurt of that. So the very first thing I do is I tell people you are as powerless over your defects of character as you are over your addiction. You don't have to feel bad about it. You don't have to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to tell you you're stupid. I'm not going to tell you you're not trying. I'm going to give you something to do that will invite God to come in. So the first inventory you write is all the pick a defective character. Okay, all the ways that protected you. Just write them all down, right? And if you can only do three at a time, then just do three at a time. Then the second column is, what is it costing you now? Again, no judgment, no effort that you can even change this thing. Okay? Just write it down. All that matters is that we're honest about it. Isn't and you're gonna come across 25 things that you want to change, but you can't. All right, but you can write them down. You can't change them, but you can't write them down. So write down everything it's costing you now. Maybe you're not in the kind of relationship you want. Maybe it affects your relationships with your kids. Just start writing it down. And then the third one is, you are not going to give up that defect of character until God has given you a substitute for it that will replace that in the here and now. I'm going to repeat that. Nobody is going to give up a defect of character until God has given them a replacement that will serve the same function, defective character they're giving up. Now, obviously, God could give you something that functions better, but um, that has to happen first, and that's going to happen. I'm going to give you three examples, okay? And without what also is really important is I really like the 4-column method for the fourth step for revealing those defects of character. Chances are what you think is a defective character, you can't even see how it's a survival mechanism without that particular format. Obviously, there's a lot of wonderful, beautiful ways to do the fourth step, and I'm not criticizing any of them at all. But sometimes it's hard to see what that really is and the function of it without that format. I'll give you an example. This I was, somebody was talking about, well, procrastination. I love people talking about procrastination as a defective character. I'm like, she says, well, I go, okay, well, give me an example, you know, and we'll write down inventory. Anybody knows me? There's always some kind of inventory involved. And she says, well, I bought this house, I bought a fixer upper, but I can't have anybody over because I just can't fix it up. I don't know, I just don't seem to get around to doing it. And then so then I said, well, don't you see how that's protecting you? She goes, what? So as long as your house is all torn up, you don't have to invite anybody over. Nobody's going to be in your house. Nobody's going to. The house is a symbol of the self. It is a way of protecting and the violate. And who knows what happened in her house? It's protecting you. It's helping you avoid, and then that helps you avoid a relationship. So, well, I can't have a relationship because then they'll want to come over to my house, and I can't have them come over to my house because I have to redo the wiring. And she's like, oh my goodness. The thing that looks like a defect of character, it was protecting her from having to look at some things about maybe what happened to her in her house, or maybe having to involve people in her life without seeing that, I want a relationship, but it was protecting her from that. And again, that's not a criticism. She was protecting herself. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when our protective mechanisms get in the way of what we want now. Until we see how they were our friend, and now they're not. And then God showed me look to God and to provide a way to get that same protection. There's another one for procrastination. Someone else, they always procrastinated on turning in paperwork and homework, but they grew up in a family where everyone was committed to making them fail, and everyone was committed to sabotaging their success, because as long as they were a failure, then they could justify their abuse of that person. So what they did is they waited till the very last minute, because then the people around them would have less chance of screwing up whatever they had accomplished. They actually had a better chance of success if they put it together really fast, if they put it together ahead of time and gave the people around them a chance to ruin it. So until they saw that, right? Until we see how that's protecting us, then they're not going to plan it. They're not going to plan. They won't be able to plan ahead, because their fear is if you do stuff in advance, somebody will screw it up for you, which doesn't always happen for everybody. Hey Scott, how much time do I have left?
I was just about to tell you, you've got about 5 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes left.
Okay. I want to leave some time for questions. When I was looking together this, believe it or not, even though there were 3 paragraphs, it's a two-parter. The 6th step is a two-parter, because what happens is people try to do in 3 paragraphs something that takes 2 full chapters in the content. And the reason that people fail on this is the process for it isn't breaking down enough. You're gonna do those 5 basic principles on this part of it, and then you're gonna work those 5 basic principles on this part, and then you're gonna work the 5 basic principles on that part of it. So I'm gonna go on to the next one, which is also the main problem is these defects of character. And there's people who want to change the name, like changing the name will take the shame out of it. If you want to change the name, I don't care, but that's not the problem. The problem is we people who have a trauma-based addiction. This is not outside of us. It's not like alcohol you can put down and there you are. It's we are it. It's like step 6 for a person with a trauma-based addiction is trying to rebuild a car while you need to drive it to work and back every day. If you take out all the pieces at once, it won't it'll be so paralyzed you won't be able to move it. So you have to do little pieces at once. It's sort of like quadruple bypass, you know. If you want to do surgery, your heart runs your whole body. Our whole life is organized around these principles. If you try to take them out, like I said, you're going to be paralyzed. You won't be able to function. You and you'll be overwhelmed and flooded by the pain that they were designed to protect you from. So the first thing you do before you start this disentangling process is is going to be you need to create a container for that using those exact same spiritual principles. That's 6 and 7 that is in the big book. That's what I call for your first pass attempt at the steps. When you go through the steps the first time, 6 and 7, the way it's written in the big book, fine. Then what's gonna, then you're gonna get enough power to keep you sober. Then you're gonna try to have to live sober, and then you start into steps 10, 11, and 12, and those are gonna create um, a container. They're gonna create enough power. The purpose of all those things, inventory, admission, amends, think of it like a little bowl. Step 10 is the left side, or like hands that are holding you. That's the one side, the one side to hold you. Step 11 is the bottom, and step 12 is the other side of that. Those things will provide both the action, the content, and the power to hold you while every day God's going to put in front of you something to annoy you, something to scare you, something you want. And as you inventory the reaction in the here and now, you will start to change this big, ugly chunk of the past. If you try, take that chunk head on, you will drown in it. It will fall on you from a great height. And I know y'all know what I mean. So that's what happens. People think they have to take this defective character head on. They try to give it up. There's so much pain, they don't have anything to replace it, and then they stop. Instead of knowing that we have this lovely, beautiful, patient way God gave you, unravel this incredibly complicated thing that you cannot do by itself. And that was it's gonna be part 2, talking about how to apply the 10th step, the 11th step, and the 12th step, how that is going to create a container to unravel the complexity of how the pain of our past is driving us in the present. Let me see. There's this one beautiful. I was looking. It was step 11 in the 12 and 12, and it kind of describes that. Let me see if I can see well enough to do it. There is a direct linkage among self examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices, self examination is step 10, these practices may bring much relief and benefit, but when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Now and then we may be granted a glimpse of the ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom, and we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure for so long as we try, however faltering, to find and do the will of our own Creator. As we have seen, self searching is the means by which we bring new vision, action, and grace to bear upon the dark and negative side of our natures. It is a step in the development of that kind of humility that makes it possible to receive God's help What he's basically saying there is that's where all the action is. Self examination, inventory, omission, amends, getting rid of the things that block us off from the power of God. They reveal what's really going on with us in a loving and beautiful, non condemnatory way. And they invite the power to hold us. They will invite sufficient comfort, see, in which to explore and unravel those defects of character. And we have to do this. We have to do this gently because what'll happen is our defenses, human defenses, work a particular way. Human beings work a particular way. We have a, they're always seeking for homostasis. It's like, people who say, "Oh, you have too much salt. Well, let's give up salt," and then they pass out because because they don't have enough salt. It's like, um, "Oh, potassium's good." They take too much potassium and then have a heart attack. It's we are meant, we are built to make changes in small increments, and then we allow the body to stabilize. We make changes in small increments. We allow the psyche to stabilize. We make changes in small increments, and our lifestyle actions are going to stabilize around that. If you push against a defense, it will push back. I'm going to tell you this right now. These defenses are stronger than you because they are absolutely, utterly convinced they have saved your life and they're saving your life. And if you try to get rid of them without giving them what's the word I want? A survival option, they will take you out and they will take you down. We just, what, like I was talking about dissociation, if it thinks you're going to kill yourself by getting rid of your defenses too fast, it'll just shut you down. It'll sabotage you over here. It'll make you be depressed. It'll make you lose care. Defenses are not the enemy. They're just one more thing to be inventoried, one more thing to be admitted. They're just one more thing to see how you hurt yourself and other people with them. They're just one more thing to pray about. They're just one more thing to show the grace of God in other people who have similar defenses, okay? There is no, in a trauma based addiction, there's no thought, feeling, or action that is not, that this particular process, if you surrender it to those actions, there will be grace for it. There's no value in criticism, no value in condemnation. There's no value in forcing these things to change. Not at all. All those things block off the power of God. There's a story. I'll tell you two stories. There's the sculptor, and it's going to look this way. It looks, these 10 steps. They don't look as if anything to do with anything. But God, I want to change this. He goes, no, inventory that. But God, I want to change that. He goes, no, inventory this. And trust me, He'll send enough things to annoy you. You have to do a 10-step on it. And what you'll see is this row of 10 steps, and that row of 10 steps, and this row of amends, and this way of being of service. You'll wake up one day, and that defective character that you couldn't change no matter what you do, it'll be gone. You can treat that with the same gentleness that we treat our own addiction. This will work. See how you can keep doing this. Anybody can write down 3 resentments for the day. Anybody can write down three fears for the day. Anybody can write down 3 needs they have. Anybody can say, God, help me with my fear. Help me with my resentment. Help me show me how you want to meet this need for me. Help me not hurt people today. Help me be an instrument of your peace. Anybody can do that, right? Anybody in this room can do that. And if we keep doing that, if we do the possible, God will do the impossible. If anyone wants to hang around for, well, not hang around, but do step the second part of this, which is how to apply 10, 11, 12 to the defects of character in front of us. Scott, you can invite me back if you think it will be helpful. Well, then just don't invite me back. But and then also if you want to get ready for that, show up at the meeting with your defects of character that you'd like to get rid of. You might want to. We did a 4-step parts 1 and 2, and there's another speak called Build a Fire, which talks about, again, about those basic principles and how to use those always to create a container while we're while this process of disentangling our defects of character, also known as survival mechanisms that don't work anymore, we can create enough power so that that can be done in doability, in doable comfort. I'm not saying you're going to be totally comfortable, but you can stay and get comfortable enough so that you don't have to run screaming from the process. Um, okay, so I think I'll just stop there if that's about right. And thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Scott, for inviting me. And if anyone has any questions, I don't know if we have time for that, but I'll just stop the recording now.